podcast studios of Trinsic Technologies. Today we have on the phone the CEO, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Art Powell of Trinsic Technologies. A man who really needs no formal introduction, and who's our fearless leader here at Trinsic. But by way of a little bit of backstory, I met Art in a coffee shop, and it seems like that's all we ever meet in every day anyway. Don't know why we can't move out of coffee shops, but I guess. But I'd like to say we probably met before Starbucks was a multi-billion. I think they were still $1 million company, and we did not meet in a Starbucks. So that's they're a little plug for the little guy out there.
That's right. Yep.
So Art, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So what we're about it with this podcast is to try to inform people, maybe have a little bit of fun through the course of the discussion, all around really business and technology. So Art, why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory, as and how you came to founding Trinsic, and what brought you there, and kind of where you brought up, and just a quick backstory if you don't mind.
Yep. Well, I was born and raised in Texas, so I am a native. So kind of proud of that. But I came about my career probably during the what will be considered the golden age of technology. And anytime you have to say that your career started during the golden age, you have just really aged yourself. So 60s and 70s were probably were the major breakthroughs with the microprocessor and the transistor. But the 80s and 90s is when we really began to see it affect culture and business. And the 90s is when I got involved. Early 90s is when I really got involved in the technology business. I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur. I owned the insurance business at that time that was actually doing rather well. And then the first 486 computers came out. And my wife said she made her first mistake. She bought me one. And I ended up playing with it so much that I was neglecting my customers. And then the customers were having to get a hold of my wife saying, "Hey, I can't get a hold of your husband. What he's doing?" Well, what I was doing was playing with computers all day long. And then my wife said she made the second worst mistake she made in her life. And she said, "You need to choose between computers or the insurance business." So I sold the insurance business. Started a PC business from the ground up, the gray boxing. We were just building systems. And this is in the early 90s or mid 90s, and I did something pretty incredibly stupid. Came up with an idea. Mozilla just came out with their first browser, Netscape. It was brand new to the market. The internet was just beginning to take off, and I actually hired a programmer to develop a website where you could order PCs online. It may have been one of the first in the entire nation. In fact, when me and the developer ran into each other at a church event 20 years later, it was not, "Hey, how are the kids? How are you doing?" It was, "We were freaking idiots. Why did we not sell and patent that thing?" So I actually did quite a mint of business selling OS2 computers online all over the world. Then unfortunately, Compaq and Dell went into their first price war, and they started selling computers cheaper than I could actually buy the components for. So I went from making about 200 PCs a month to about 3 months with no PCs whatsoever. I realized I didn't want to be in the hardware business. It was too much of a commodity already, even at that early stage. I kind of saw where that was heading. Cashed the business out, closed it out, went to work for IBM as a system administrator. And it was and I say it was a golden age because it was the golden age. I mean, there were no certifications. People didn't know what they were doing. And basically, I would be in this room, and they would say, "Here, can you put this together?" And they'd give me manuals. And I was like, "Well, why do you want me to do this?" And they were like, "Well, you look like a nerd, A, and B, no one else really wants to do it." So, that's literally how I got into the technical side of the business, was just doing things that no one else, reading manuals no one else wanted to read, and doing things no one else wanted to do. And it was a great escape for, guys like me in the 90s. young men who were nerds, and it gave us a career outlet. So I'm very thankful for it. I don't know where we would have wound up, if IT hadn't taken off the way it did. So at one point, I decided when I was working for IBM, I had enough, and I wanted to start my own business. And decided I was going to torture my poor wife, one more last time. And so I started Trinsic. And that's pretty much how I got it. And I've been doing it ever since for about 14 years. Brought in partners, you being one of them, and our two others, Phil and Brad. So that's literally kind of fell into the business, fell into the technology, still love it, still mess with it. I'm learning C# right now. All because of a game I'm playing, so I can modify the game. And at my age, if you're still playing PC games and then writing scripts for PC games, I guess you are definitely a geek. So I will not disavow that.
That's always helpful to have in a technology company as somebody that knows technology. So
Yeah.
We won't begrudge you. We won't begrudge you that. So through the years, you've seen the evolution, obviously, of, as you pointed out, just the industry in general. But
Yep.
one of the things that I find interesting about is this cultural shift that we've had with a focus on support. And early on in the industry, there really wasn't much support because people didn't even understand the technology they were pushing. It was moving so fast, much less how to support it. There were just enough people to kind of put it out there. Like you mentioned here, go read a manual. We don't have anybody else in here that can figure this out. So how are you going to find anybody to support when you barely have enough people to get it out? So that being said, being in a support role and supporting technology for the last 20 some odd years, give me your best story of support in terms of trying to keep a customer happy. So start with that.
Well, even when I was working in internal IT support, your customer is the company you're working for, right? And the worst story, this craziest story I ever had was, so we had this server room, and I was working for a dev company, and I was the IT manager. We had this server room, and we had our servers racked, and the devs kept going back in there to do things. And this was a company that on day one, when I took over the company, I'm not making this up. On day one, I come in there, I get a call from the FBI that they're coming to arrest us to shut the entire company down. Because one of the devs had basically left a FTP server wide open. It had gotten hacked, and they were using it to attack an FBI server.
Nice.
Yeah, right. That was day one phone call, right? So I had so of course moving forward, I had been begging them to allow me to lock up, to put a key lock on that door and where the servers were, so they couldn't get in there and be messing with the stuff. Well, we were running Novell, which their file services were way ahead of their time. Really, really fantastic file service. It was a good thing we were too, because we were using the journaling file system where it would journal all the entries. And it was a good thing too, because one of the devs went back there and was messing with a cable and unplugged the file server from the UPS. Shut it down. Dirty shutdown. 3 days later, when Novell finished the journaling recovery, I had to babysit that thing for 3 days, night and day. I got my keypad. It was fortunate that we didn't lose a ton of data. And again, that was because if it had been an NT file server that data probably would have been screwed up, messed up, and gone. Because NT, particularly at that time, did not handle dirty shutdowns well at all. So, that just, it just shows you how physical access is always a problem. And a lot of times people don't think about that. We had another client, the same thing. I had Trinsic, I had a client calling me up, chewing me out about how the network kept going down and we couldn't figure it out. We're like, what's going on? So we put a camera inside the room, and sure enough, the network goes out again, and sure enough, we see an employee walking inside the room and unplugging a device. Because they thought they were unplugging something else, and they kept wondering why it wouldn't work, so they kept going back and unplugging it. So yeah, those those are really good examples of why physical access is important, and you need to think about it. And we got them to lock that room after that also. So.
Yeah. I have a coffee mug that's sitting in front of me that I got from one of our vendors, and it says, "Anyone who thinks the customer is always right has never worked in IT."
Yeah, well, and because it's a tough relationship, right? I mean, because they don't understand what you do, and they don't
care to
understand
understand.
how complicated it is.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, nor do they care to understand what you do. That's the
No,
whole point.
no, they don't. That's what they pay you for.
Yeah. So where do you where do you think? Let's just pivot a little bit over to businesses. What would be in their best interest for them? To do. What's one of the single things that they might do to better their own technology environment? I mean, is it a hardware? Usually that's probably on the hardware side. I mean, what if you were going to walk into any business? What's the first thing you say? Look, here are the bare bones you have to have, and maybe you don't need an IT company to or a full-time IT person, but you need to get these things, locked down right away.
Yeah, well, are we talking like from a security standpoint, or are we talking like from
any? I mean, just you walk in, you go, look, come on, buy. Don't be cheap on this. Don't be.
Yeah. Well, first of all, don't be cheap on hardware, right? Because there's, large companies, OEM companies like Dell and HP, and that sell, or Acer now, which has become a player, that sell large volumes, really do make two classes of devices, right? And they make a consumer class device, or a very low-end cheap class device, and then they make what they call an enterprise class device. And I wish they'd stop using the word enterprise because it scares people. I think they're paying a lot of money for something that they shouldn't have to pay for. If you're a small business, buy the enterprise class devices. They're going to last you. First of all, most small companies want to use your devices 5 to 7, maybe even longer years. And if you want to get 5 to 7 years, you need to spend extra money, get the enterprise class devices because they're better made. They're more well designed, they're better manufactured, and so they're engineered for more fault tolerance. So they're going to last you a longer time. They're going to be using higher end drives, SSD drives, things like that nature, which have a lower failure rate. So I tell people, if you're going to, it's like buying a car, right? I just recently bought a Honda Accord. It was not the cheapest car in the market. It was not the most expensive car in the market, but there's a good chance my daughter will be driving it in her 40s. She's 21 years old, right? So it's a good investment because it's such a well-engineered, well-made car. And that's the same thing as when you buy hardware, you want the well-engineered, well-made devices. They're going to last you longer. You're going to get more out of them. So that's, the second thing is the internet is becoming, the internet/network is becoming everything. Because as more applications are run in the cloud, as more applications are going to be hosted somewhere else and not inside your network and your internet connection become paramount. They become the most important thing you have. And so you really need to make sure, even if you're a small company at this point, it becomes worth the value is there to bring someone in to make sure that is set up right from the beginning. Because if you're not running the proper equipment, you don't have good wireless, things of that nature, then you're going to have network problems, and then you're going to be blaming the vendor that you're having all these problems with this application when it has nothing to do with the application. It has to do with your network. And I think that's one of the biggest, and wireless, that's the other thing. I think people have, wireless was oversold. We were told in the early 2000s that, cables would go away, and this has not happened. And the reason why this has not happened is because it's basically, I don't want to get technical, but it's basically the way wireless was designed to accept interference. So anything can interfere with it, and it causes problems. Not only that, you can only have, so much traffic going across the wireless at one point. So, I would say make sure you have good wiring. You have, jacks, hardware, RJ45, cable jacks in all your offices where people can jack in even with their laptops when they're doing heavy work. And make sure you spend good money on good equipment, and make sure your network is right. If you really do those three things, you'll solve about 80% of your problems. Because when we walk in to a new client, those are the three things we're looking at immediately. Do you have good equipment? Well, if you got crappy equipment, we can't fix crappy equipment, so we're going to ask you to replace some of that. Do they have a good network design, and does the network running efficiently? Are they trying to run everything off of wireless when they shouldn't be? And do they have good internet? These are probably the three biggest things. If you will make sure that those three things are set up properly, have the right equipment, you're going to solve a lot of your issues.
Okay, yeah, and I would agree with you there. Is that a lot of the prices too have come down, especially on the telephony side, on getting good internet, getting good
Yep.
backup is now. It used to be very expensive to have good backup, and everybody ran to the nearest Starbucks or back home if you had a problem at the office. Those are things that I people ought to look into
Yep.
because we'll get to this in a second, is where the technology is going. But like you said, more and more it's all being designed to go in the cloud and reside in the cloud. It makes complete business sense for the people that are designing all the software. And if that's going to be the case, then you're going to need to have access to it, and fast
Yep.
access. So what do you think is the hardest thing that you have to explain to a business owner about technology? I mean, maybe there's one or just a couple that you say, wow, I keep having this conversation with business owners, and it always seems to be around X.
Oh, that's easy. It's always around. I did not write code for that application you bought. The biggest struggles we have in the MSP market, or any really, I had this problem even when I was in internal IT, is somehow users will never differentiate between the support and people who write code. And when vendors, this is the reason why there's probably a really agnostic relationship between IT support people and software vendors, is because we end up eating a lot of grief for what they do. They will blame the IT support. Well, why can't you fix this? This keeps happening. Well, this keeps happening because someone wrote crappy code, and I can't fix crappy code. So this is a really, this causes a lot of angst. And then when we call the IT vendor, the first thing out of their mouth, the software vendor, the first thing out of their mouth is, well, it's the network.
Right.
It got so bad, like at Trinsic, we just finally just took over that role. We would have the customer call the software vendor. We just stopped it because they, of course, would immediately blame the IT. Now, I'm not saying that, it's never not the network. Sometimes it is. But I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, it's not the network. And the customer, the business owner, the employee, they can't differentiate. They just see it as one system. And that's trying to make people understand how complex this environment is. It's very difficult. They don't get it. I don't know if they'll ever get it, because unless you really kind of peeled it back, it's kind of hard to explain to people how you have this kludge of different systems all trying to work together and all competing for resources. And I tell people,
changing,
and it's changing. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it used to be that you bought software out of a box and it went in
Yep.
there, and the updates came quarterly, if not annually. And so that had some good and bad to it. The good was it didn't change that much, so you could put in place workarounds or try to figure out.
Exactly, and they had some more control. I think they had better control at that time. Now they can just push out an update.
Yeah.
And they can push out a problem to 100,000 people at the same time, and we've seen this repeatedly with Microsoft and other vendors where they push out. Microsoft just recently on the Windows 10 update had to repeal it because it was causing so many problems.
Yeah.
So it is and so trying to get people to understand that we had nothing to do with that we're just trying to get a workaround for it, that can be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's too where we can get in this in a little bit, where the technology is the role that we play is changing as well. As a matter of fact, let's just jump into that. I mean, the role of the IT specialist was, more, would you not agree, more hardware oriented in the
Yep.
past, and now is literally becoming pretty much software. I mean, the hardware is not to say that it's bulletproof, but it's much, much better.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
its failure rates are very, very, very low. So when you buy, if you buy a laptop or hardware, the last three laptops I bought, and I've replaced them about every 3 or 4 years. I've not had an ounce of trouble with them. So your failure rates are just really, really low. I mean, I remember the days when we used to get hard drives in, and they would have a sheet, and on that sheet they would tell you what sectors were bad on the hard drive, and you had to go in and manually set those sectors off. It was because, in other words, they were literally pushing out hard drives where every single hard drive had a failure in it right from the start. So we've come a long way from that. This stuff is, like you said, it's not bulletproof, but it's darn near close. And so, but you're right, it has shifted, and the other end of the spectrum now is where it's gotten complicated and where it's gotten, where you are going to have problems, and that is all the software trying to coexist, and now you have local software on your machine and you have software on the cloud. And so it is, you're right. And then people want to interact with that software in the cloud. And then you're bringing up all the, I think the other thing that's really changing is we're all becoming security experts. I mean, you can't, almost every tech, even our level 1 techs at Trinsic are very aware of security issues at multiple levels. And you have to be, because when you're interacting with this stuff and you're setting it up, it's very complex. And if you're not careful, you can open something up. And then, next thing you know, that you've got a hacked machine.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually a good jump off point, because security is, becoming the 900-pound gorilla that nobody wants to or the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about as much. You say to most business owners security, and all they think is dollars. In it, why don't you go into a little bit about kind of the different levels of security that kind of what do you need, the must-haves,
Yeah.
you ought to have. I mean, if you just have any, and then kind of I get it, it's out there. You're probably don't need to be as worried. But I'll preface this by stating that within the industry, we're seeing more and more attacks, the vast majority of which come from outside this company. So there's actually nothing we're going to do to regulate it. It's not going to be regulated out of existence or anything.
Yeah.
And so just kind of step us through where you think that security, as a business owner, ought to be focused.
Yeah, I think back when I was the network administrator back in the 90s, right? Your biggest concern, believe it or not, was internal hacks. Now people with inside the company who are doing nefarious things, right? Now you should always be worried about that. But because in the 90s, that was the predominant way you were going to get hacked. The chances of you getting hacked up from an outside organization or individuals were very low. Because of that, they did a really good job of setting up internal security. Everyone's got to log into the network now. So they solved a lot of those problems.
There's good audit trails, so we're going to.
There's good audit trails, right? But by focusing on the internal, they neglected the external. So of course now the external is a nightmare, and the external is a nightmare for several reasons. And one is software. I mean, Cisco we just found out Cisco had. I mean, I hadn't heard of Cisco having a security problem in 15 years, and just found out that they have like a really nasty one. But the whole thing is that, and of course, then we found out that I'll throw a bone here to your conspiratist listeners, and we find out that the CIA was intercepting switches and routers and putting code on the back end, which was wonderful. But anyway, but the whole thing is that the thing is that so you have this software that has glitches and bugs, and you have that gives these hackers access, and this has become, people don't understand how crazy this has become. There are literally dark net websites where what we call script kiddies, and what a script kiddie is someone who's not really a hacker themselves. In other words, they don't have the actual skills to hack something, but what they do is they go out to these dark net websites and they buy the software that's made by hackers who have these skills that enable them to go hack networks. And these sites literally have like rating systems and technical support. for the product
Hey,
that you buy. And I heard it's actually pretty good technical support. So, so better than you can get with some commercial vendors. So
well, it's
you
because
hear
they're making money off of it, right? You know, when
yeah, and well, at least they understand the adage of if we sell a product, we keep our customer happy,
yeah,
right? These script kiddies go buy this stuff and it gets them into networks, and they don't have to code a thing. It's all there, ready for them. This is how bad it's gotten, right? And so what customers can do, what people listening to this podcast, the thing I tell our customers all the time is have good passwords. That's your number one defense.
yeah.
You've got to have good passwords. Your date of birth is not a good password.
Your favorite dog's Spot with a number after it.
Yeah, you're going to get hacked in 2 seconds, and listen. It's gotten so bad that we host a lot of mail. We host a lot of email for clients. We host a lot of email for clients who that's all they do with us, right? So we sell a lot. We do a lot of email hosting, and it actually got so bad we had to enforce password rules because they were using what they call their alphabet password hackers, where they just tried different combinations. But the way they work is they try the easiest ones first, the most well-known, easiest to hack passwords that people use. Yeah. And our customers were getting their email hacked on a continual basis because they were using those passwords. So we had to enforce password rules on our mail servers to make it stop. That's how bad it is. So number one is make sure your employees have good passwords, and they need to be. There's a good website, and I'll send it to you where you can put it on the podcast information. But it's called X Passwords, and it's really good because it takes 3 words, right? Because one of the biggest problems that people have is they say they can't remember passwords. Well, it takes 3 words. So like blue skies, mountain, blue sky mountain, and then it puts words and capitals in it. And you can remember that. It's easy, and it's long, and linked is everything on password.
Right. Yeah, 13 characters or more is what I've.
Yeah, then you're to a point where it's basically unhackable.
Right.
So number 1 is good passwords. Gotta have a good. Number 2 is do your updates. Do your updates. Some of the recent really nasty malware that came out recently, where it would lock your computer and destroy all your data, or you couldn't get it back. Some of the Bitcoin hacking that went on. None of our clients were affected. Not one. We didn't have one of our clients, not one device in the entire network got hit. And why is that? Because we are very adamant about making sure that our customers keep their software up to date.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of those things that, if you're not going to have somebody, well, 2 things. One is if you hire a managed service company, that's what we're in the business of, managed service. You need to make sure they're managing. I mean, I get very frustrated within our own, suite of technical folks that in our industry that forget that the whole point about the managed service is you actually have to manage it. It means you have to monitor it. You have to do the updates. Because you do the updates, you're not going to see any of these problems, or the likelihood is so de minimis. I mean, it really is. You'd have to be at the point of the spear to get, and most of our clients aren't at the point of the spear of something that's going to be, attacked.
Yeah.
But then,
exactly.
And I get real frustrated with, folks in our own, and if you don't have somebody who's managing it, understand, then you really, as a business owner, need to be, when you see updates, you see alerts, you need to make sure you're on the list of getting all of those email updates. So you can poke your vendor. If you have a break fix guy who just comes in periodically, well, then you need to say, hey, I want to be on every update.
Exactly.
And so any piece of software, anything you've got running, anything that sends out that needs a patch or whatever, I want to get that email. I want to be on that same email list. And trust me, they're going to be reluctant to want to give you that because they know as well as we do how much work that is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and this is why we have a full staff at night. That's their home staff.
And I don't think business people understand that, and so then they act shocked when all something gets in, and somebody after the fact is running and throwing a patch in there right afterward, but it's too late.
It's too late. Damage is done. Exactly. Yeah. And people forget the largest hack that ever occurred, which was the Target hack.
Yeah.
Where they had hackers on their point of sale devices getting credit cards and debit numbers. That occurred because of the two things we just talked about. Number one is a vendor was using a default password on a VPN, and they hacked it and they got into the network. But what's not talked about much, because Target doesn't like to discuss it a whole lot, is the reason why they were able to hack the POS systems is because they were like four security update revisions behind.
Yeah, well, and they sat on that network for months, preparing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they could do it because, so if someone had used password, so even if they had hacked their password, but they had updated the point of sale software,
yeah,
then this hack would have not been near as severe as what it was.
Yeah.
So that is a perfect example of why those two things are so important. And then I would say lastly, I don't care if you're a business and you're on the network and you have more than 2 or 3 employees, you need to, because at that point you have some assets you need to protect. And I would say that you need to have a firewall and a managed firewall. I like to tell people firewalls are like deadbolts on your door, okay? They keep out the amateurs, and they let you know that when a professional has gotten in your house. Well, how do you know when a professional has gotten in your house? He has to break a window or a door. He has to break something to get in because you deadbolted it. He's not going to just pick that lock. Now, firewalls are the same way. They keep the amateurs out, but they let you know if a professional gets in. If somebody is actually watching the firewall.
Yeah, you got to monitor it.
You got to monitor it. So it's, and the thing is, like, and I'm going to shamelessly plug our company here, but with Trinsic, we can do that for so inexpensive that if you don't do it, you're crazy. That is something that you should pay professionals, because that way they're watching for alerts, they're watching for unusual traffic, and then they're going to know if a professional's got into your network. And that really is the key. You want to know, did someone download some malware they weren't supposed to? Now someone has control of that device. Well, if you're not watching your firewall, you're not going to know. And we recently, and you and I know that we recently ran into a regulated industry customer who's in a HIPAA-related industry, who had gotten hacked and did not even know it. And the only reason they found out about it is because the hackers were done doing whatever they wanted to do and basically announced themselves.
Yeah.
Now, the only way and this was not a small organization, and the only way that could occur is somebody wasn't watching the firewall, because somebody watching the firewall, they've been like, why do we have all that traffic coming out of our network?
Yeah.
But it wasn't happening.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, and that's one of the things that people have to know. These aren't large businesses we're dealing with here. I mean, it's not like
right.
It's easier oftentimes for some of these folks to exploit the smaller businesses. I mean, they know they're not managed, or the likelihood of them being managed is less. I mean, it's going to be much harder to run a dark web server out of Dell's infrastructure there at or let's pick any.
Yeah, because they're going to monitor their firewall.
Yeah, they already know they're under attack. I mean, they are loaded for bear, so to speak. Whereas, but the same amount of damage. These guys don't need a whole lot of horsepower. They just need to be able to use, if they can emulate the same thing with 50 businesses that they could get from one, well, it's easier. Just go through the 50. I mean, it likens me back to a book I read years ago. I can't remember. It was written by a cat burglar who retired. You gotta love America. You can cat burglar for 35 years, retire. I don't know quite how you retire as a criminal, but he never gotten caught, and wrote a book and made a ton of money on telling people how to protect their homes against cat burglars, which is hysterical in and of itself. But but he was like, how do you not get caught for 35 years? And he said it was really simple. He said, I went to homes that had like high hedges and things where the windows were covered. He said, I always went in the middle of the day when I knew people weren't going to be there. I never dealt with people that had dogs or, it's like I have I have millions of homes to choose from. Why would I even begin to look at any that, had any of these things? And he just went through all these things. He said, basic stuff, put it up, again, and I would just pass you over and go by and go into the next. I mean, it's just real crazy how doing the basics, just getting and then managing
Yep.
those basics. So yeah,
It
that's
doesn't. Well, it takes the bullseye off your back, right? So they're not going to go after you. Now, if you are in a regular, the thing is, if you do have critical information, if you have credit card information, if you're in and if you want, we can talk about
yeah.
talking about regulated industry.
Let's go into regulated industries because that's really where.
Yeah,
I mean, now you got the
more
government right
more.
coming down on you.
Yeah, and listen, people understand more regulation is coming. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not going to decrease. It's going to increase.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why, you get regulation in government when people don't do what they're supposed to do, and it causes problems for the consumers, and that's pretty much where we're at. People are like, well, why are they hacking all these medical clinics? Well, because if you have a birth certificate and medical records in Europe, you can get a passport. There you go. So the whole thing is that there is a big market for Social Security numbers, birth certificates, medical information, anything that would identify somebody. Huge market for it, and there's a huge market for credit card numbers. I mean, they're selling them on the web, and the whole thing is, so the government is going
Yeah,
to.
but you can change, right? You can change your credit card. You can't change your birth
Can't
certificate.
change exactly. You can't change your medical records. You can't
Yeah.
change your credit card information. So, your Social Security number. You can, but it is.
Yeah, but
Nightmare,
it's like right, but that's the thing about that makes this sort of medical or personal
Yeah.
information so, and it's very difficult
Yeah.
because you just can't change it. It's not as simple
Yeah.
as a credit card. I can cancel a credit card. That's pretty easy, I mean,
Yeah. And so the whole thing is that the government is taking this very seriously. There was about 3 years ago, there was a small, when I say small, there was like 5, 6 doctors and about 40, 50 employees. There was a small doctor's office up in I think it was Wyoming, but they got hacked and they were blackmailed, a Bitcoin blackmail, and they did the right thing. They called the FBI, but they fined the company $450,000 for not following HIPAA protocol. That was a small company, $450,000. So they're not playing around anymore. I mean, the government's they're levying every year for the last 3 years. They've levied more and more fines than they did the previous year by a wide margin. I think last year was like $238 million, something like that, and it's going to go up every year. So they're tired of it, and rightfully so. I mean, this stuff is not happening because, these, people understand that when it comes to HIPAA, and being probably a borderline libertarian, I can't believe this is going to actually come out of my mouth. But HIPAA, they wrote the HIPAA regulation. They were actually pretty reasonable. The government doesn't never expect you not to get hacked. That would be kind of hypocritical considering they've been hacked quite a few times themselves.
all the time.
Yeah. So, but they definitely expect you to do everything in your power to make sure that you don't get hacked. Yeah. And if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, they are going to hammer you.
Yeah.
And they're going to hammer you where it counts. They're going to take your money. And so they're not playing anymore. It's gotten real.
And I see state governments too. I'm starting to see some regulations at the state level. That's businesses need to start, especially those that are in regulated industries, better start taking notice.
If you're in the financial, you're in the medical industry. If you don't have an MSP who's diligently watching your stuff, who's making sure that you're staying compliant, who is working with you, then you're playing Russian roulette. I mean, if you get hit and you don't have the ability to show that you've done what you're supposed to do, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So, and this is going to get worse as time goes by, especially with things, and the cloud does not, people think that the cloud is the end all to solve that problem. It helps, but it doesn't solve it because you're still accessing the data. And if they get on your machine, put a keystroke logger in there, watch you log into your cloud, and then now they have your username and password, and they come in behind you, you're in trouble. Funny how we're back to passwords again, right? So this is why I tell people you have to make sure that you're taking care of the basics, and making sure that you're being diligent, you're training the employees and doing what you're supposed to be doing, because the government has upped the ante on this, and they are going to continue to do so.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I think that's also where you should be pushing back on your technology vendors, especially those that are managing your networks, is to say I need help knowing what it is about these regulations. And people within our industry, within those companies like Trinsic, we can't just turn a blind eye to, well, that's really your own problem. That's something you need to go get us.
No.
We good companies should take some ownership of the role that, yeah, there's technology involved here. There's a technology component, make sure, and then be able to point clients to and assist clients with the proper other vendors to help them with whether it's documenting, whether it's employee training. And I think that because they all kind of go hand in glove, and that's
Yep.
and it's really part of what, as we develop in the way our industry changes, it's going to be more and more one where we are going to need to be more consultative, so to speak, on some of these regulatory elements. And so,
and it's especially pertinent because your weakest link is your employee, and will always be your employee.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then your second weakest link is your network.
Yeah.
And if you don't take care of those two things, if you don't monitor and watch and take care of those two things, monitoring employees is going to become very important as time goes down. And I'm not talking the big brother monitoring, but just making sure that they're not accessing things that they're not supposed to be accessing. They're not using passwords they're not supposed to be using passwords. I mean, this is becoming more and more important because companies will hold you, the government will hold companies responsible for breaches of regulated data if you are not training your employees and reprimanding them when they're not doing the proper thing. And that really, they're good. And I'm already seeing that. When they're doing audits, I'm seeing them beginning to concentrate on that. And so that is something that you need an MSP to work with you on that. And the other reason why you need an MSP is because they're constantly changing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And if and when it comes to the law, ignorance is not going to get you a non-guilty verdict. No. You better know these regulations.
Yeah. The one of the things that kind of segues in, it's always in kind of wrap up toward the end. I always like to wrap up with the
Sure.
absurd. So I mean, in our industry, there's a lot of that. You can get a lot of, but we talk about passwords. We talk about security and the fight to but one of the huge elements to this going forward, we have this lack of privacy because everybody puts their stuff everywhere, and B, but one of the things that people are moving to is biometrics, right? So I can get onto my laptop, just it scans my face, right, or my phone or whatever, and so this is going to be but at that point too, we now have everybody's biometric data. So
yeah, exactly.
I mean, let's go full bore. So where do you think? And then we have artificial intelligence to layer on top of all that. So give me your kind of to end this, and I just threw something out there, but find what's a good conspiracy theorist, kind of. I don't know, something going forward that you say, hey, this is kind of scary stuff. Well, we ought to worry about some of this stuff as just as citizens.
I always go back to the law of unintended consequences, right? Facebook came out, everybody was like so thrilled, oh, this is going to change the world, and it's going to be nirvana now, and we're going to feed the homeless. And what we don't take into account is the law of unintended consequences, right? By befriending everybody online social media, I now have no friends and don't talk to anybody.
Right.
So I would say the same thing is, a couple of things that are going to be really interesting to play out. Things never play out the way people think they're going to play out. In the 80s and 90s, all I heard about was by the year 2000, there would be no shopping malls. Until recently, shopping malls were still the fastest growing commercial real estate. Although the real estate market is being affected by it, there are companies that are using the internet and are growing. Companies that, retail companies that are just growing leaps and bounds using technology. So it definitely changed the landscape. It definitely changed the way we buy things, but not quite 100% like they thought it would. And I think it's going to be the same thing with a lot of the emerging technologies that we're seeing now. They're finding things are much more difficult than they thought they would be. Google just recently pulled back their about 40-50% of their investment in driverless cars sorry, millennials, you're going to have to learn how to drive. Yeah, so,
Oh no, I'm liking
so
that one. I was really hoping that because I can't drive anyway. So
yeah, yeah, right.
I'm a big proponent of the driverless. Dude, keep them from driving. I mean,
You,
I drive standard transmission. For those of you that are younger out there, that's the
oh my
little
God,
stick thing
yeah.
in the middle. It's my anti-millennial. So when they steal my vehicle, I'm gonna tell them the person's over 40. They're going, how do you know? Because it's standard.
Standards, yeah, they would know how to drive it.
Oh,
So yeah, no, Dick. So I really think so. It's going to be very hard to predict where this is going to land. I do think a couple of things. I think particularly with artificial intelligence, I think so artificial intelligence is going to be interesting because, and I like to call it augmented intelligence. I don't really think it's artificial. I mean, the problem with reasoning and intuition is we don't understand it. You can take a 2-year-old, drop them in any country in the entire world, and within a couple of years, they're speaking the language fluently.
yeah.
Now, we don't understand how that works because the child does not have a data set. They tout all these AI. They're like, oh, this deep learning machine learned how to play Go, but you had to teach it the rules.
Yeah.
A child can sit there and watch the game, and if he's old enough and smart enough, he can figure out the rules just watching it. You can't do that with AI. So I do not want to. I don't think at the same time. I don't think we should underestimate the impact that augmented intelligence is going to have because it's already beginning to see its effect. And I tell people if you have a job where it's a repetitive job where you're just doing the same thing over and over again,
Yeah,
that job's going to be gone in 20 years.
It's gone.
Yeah. So that is going to be I don't know now like where is IT going to be affected by this? I think it's going to be IT is a black magic. It really is. Because most of the good IT people actually don't have IT degrees. Because they have this ability to think a certain way that's unique, where they're logical and rational, but they can also think outside the box at the same time. My wife says we're just insane, and society finally found a way, something productive for us to do. But it is definitely a different mindset, and so I don't think like AI is going to overtake IT jobs. I do think it's going to make repetitive tasks redundant, and that it'll free us up to do other things. I do think some of the things that we're seeing impact society were things they talked about 20 or 30 years ago. And it's interesting to me how we're really not talking about some of those things because the problem with technologies, they overpromise. They come in, AI is going to change the world and no one's going to drive cars in 10 years. Well, none of that happens. Yeah. So then people forget about it. And then another 10 years later, the impacts start catching people off guard, and it starts hitting people. And I think that's where we're at right now with I think the cloud services are really right now what's having the largest impact. The ability to work from anywhere is really driving. We're having this conversation while you're sitting in two geographically different cities. And I think you're going to see more of that, and that's already beginning to impact society. I mean, your people are working from home more and more and more. This was stuff that was promised in the 90s, but 20 years later, now we're really beginning to see the impact of it. And I do think that if you're, it's like I told my kids when they were growing up. I said you need to either have a degree in something, a degree in a trade craft, or you need to have experience in a trade craft. But you need a trade craft. And I think that would be my advice to people: is you need to have a job where you have where it's not a redundant, repetitive task. And part of that is customer service.
Yeah, I was going to push that. That's where I think think about the depth we have, or of people in customer sat. I mean, you pointed out early on in this conversation. You said, look, we're having to deal with vendors. And their people, well, one of the problems we have when we deal with vendors, they don't even have people for us to deal with that understand their own product. I mean, they don't take the time, energy, and they're not putting the financial resources into the people to support their own products that they're putting out. And the reason they don't is because, well, there's nobody there to hire to do it, right? Because they're all now too busy, doing other jobs that are soon going to be automated. So, this idea that oh, we're going to run out of, jobs for, no, there are plenty of jobs that need to be done that aren't being done simply because just within our own industry alone, I'm sure I could get into
Yep.
other that we would love to have people do, but for the fact that, well, right now paving a road or moving, inventory in a warehouse or driving a warehouse
Yeah.
truck is more important than what we have. But what becomes important changes as the technology changes.
Yeah, I
So
think the danger here is the how rapid these changes are occurring. Right. I mean, this is what's going to be a challenge for culture and society and political systems. And I think that from the thing that worries me the most from a morality standpoint, and probably from a societal standpoint, is the invasion of privacy by corporations. Right.
and the
And listen,
government.
yeah, and the government, and I'm one of these people that because they never really had this type of capacity before, and now they do. And as you said, like granted, people will be using biometrics, but now hackers will go after that biometric
Oh
data,
yeah. Oh yeah.
right? So because and they're already, it's interesting that
Yeah, and then
companies
how do
are
you change
recently,
your cells, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah, exactly,
good luck
and
at
it's
that
really
one.
exactly, and it's really interesting because recently a company just released a video that was created by an augmented intelligence. I'm going to keep using the term augmented intelligence over and over again until people start using it, stop using artificial intelligence. But it was using this augmented intelligence to create a video that was fake,
Yeah.
and no one could show that it was fake.
Oh yeah. No, it's crazy. No, they're
And
gonna be
if
able to
you think
replicate
about the
anything.
societal implications of that,
Yeah. I mean,
that you could basically, that people will literally not be able to believe what they see
right. Well, and think
because
about
we,
it that
yeah,
now it becomes an app, and everybody in the world can do it. So
exactly.
it's not so bad that okay, only it has to be done by a very high intelligent person using a piece of software
Yeah.
that narrows the scope of people who could even produce something that's
Right.
you know
Yep.
but now when anybody now we're at the lowest common denominator has access to the technology. Yeah, it's not a good
Yeah. So
thing.
there's going to be right, and there's definitely going to be some. It's going to cause problems, and I think the government. If for once, I'd like to see the government get out in front of it. Like that's
Oh,
going to happen.
no, no,
But
no.
yeah.
Don't worry about that. Okay.
But it's going to happen. I think personally two technologies that I'm looking at. I've been reading. I'm a technologist. I read constantly on science and technology, and subscribe to the MIT Review magazine. I'm really constantly looking at for what's gonna impact society. What's going to change things. I really think that uh, virtual reality. I do not think it's going to have such a huge. It will in the gaming market. There's no doubt about that. It will have some limited use in the business world. I think augmented reality is going to have a huge impact in the next 15 to 20 years on businesses. I think, I'm definitely in the winter of my life, being in my 50s. I'm on the back end, and I think that, as I get ready to exit this world, I think that's where we're going to see things change. Because if I'm able, let's play a scenario. I'm a technician. I need to replace a hard drive on a device, on a server. I put on some glasses. I'm looking at the server, and now these glasses show me through the glasses, the augmented reality, show me and say, hey, here's how you do it. This is the position the part goes in. This is how you pull out the other part.
Yeah.
Um, you could play that out to all different types of industries. I think let's say I'm meeting with a client at Starbucks. Let's use their Starbucks example, right? Since Starbucks is the new office space of this
Right.
generation, right? So let's say I'm meeting at Starbucks and I have my glasses on, and it's pulling up all this person's information, their back history. It's giving me all the conversational pieces I need lifetime,
Right.
right? I'm looking for a restaurant to eat at, and I'm driving in my car, and there's a VR console up on my windshield, and it's showing me the ratings of all these restaurants as I'm driving by.
Right.
So this is not far off. I mean, we're going to see this in the next 10 years and become very popular. Or I can pick up my phone and go to camera mode. This is already being both Samsung and Apple are already have this in beta and are using it and testing it. And I hold it up, and it shows all these restaurants, and about 3 or 4 seconds later, all these reviews or information about these businesses pop up.
Right.
With the 5G networks coming, being able to upload and download that data wirelessly to devices and cars and automobiles, yes, that I think augmented reality is going to radically change businesses the way the internet did in the next 10 to 15 years. I think we're going to see it very soon. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's a good way to end. So, Art, thank you for your time. Certainly appreciate it. For those of you, and we mentioned a few things throughout this podcast below. They'll be in the content below. Some of the links to some of the stuff that we were talking about, the password bit.
Yep.
Links to our own dark web, portal place where we're doing our other business. I'm just joking. My
You were supposed to tell him, Brett.
Right. So that's what we've got going on. But we thank you for taking the time. We will, look forward to hoping this podcast expands your knowledge of a little bit about some of the different issues that between business and technology. Again, thank you, Art, for your time, and you have a blessed day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.